From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Beres here on a Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. We've got a great show to kick things off this week. We're going to be talking about medical malpractice. Have you ever felt that you've been wronged by a doctor? Do you suspect maybe you didn't get the care you felt you should have received? Not sure how to handle that? You'd be surprised how often things like this can happen, but proving it in court can be a real issue, which is why it's pretty darn important if you decide to pursue something like this, you get yourself a good lawyer. And we have one of those on with us this morning who specializes in medical malpractice. Clint Kelly, good morning to you,
Nick,
sir.
good morning to you. Good to see you.
Nice to have you on. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a few weeks. We were just talking about what we did this weekend, and he and I both watched football.
A lot of it.
There's a lot of good football.
Yeah.
And that ties into medical malpractice, maybe. You ever think about some of these cases with the head injuries for the football players and all of that? And the proving it, and we all know how much the NFL settled with and all of that, and whether or not that was enough. But I'm telling you, blows to the head. I never played tackle football. Obviously, I'm a little guy. I loved it. But boy, I'm glad I didn't now.
Well, there is a considerable body of science that supports the fact that people get concussions playing football, and that concussions can lead to permanent injury. When I played, and a lot of my friends played, we never gave a moment's thought. It used to be called getting your bell rung.
Yeah, see some stars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or get your ticket stamped. I mean, there were different words for it, and you would have to kind of just step back and get your wits back together, and you go out and go play, and you wouldn't give a moment's thought to it. But some of these people, particularly as they got older and played college ball and pro ball, took excruciating hits.
Yeah.
And the proof is that the NFL knew years ago, perhaps even over a decade earlier, about the body of science that was developing of people who were getting permanent brain damage and didn't want to do anything about it.
It's a question, and I'm not sure this overlaps into medical malpractice, and we'll open up the phone lines here in just a moment for you. But to me, I know there's medical doctors that work for the NFL that maybe knew things that didn't tell them a long time ago. But at what point, especially in this day and age now, as far as I'm concerned, back then those old players, they didn't know, kind of like in the old days when somehow you didn't realize smoking was bad for you. Maybe that's different. Now if you play football and 10, 15 years from now you suffer from that, I'm not sure I have any sympathy for you, because the information's out there now. We know that. There's plenty of players right now who will just say, oh, I know, I'm taking that chance, that's fine. Don't come complain to me later when you're senile because you took too many shots to the head. I mean, where's the personal responsibility in all this? And again, I think there are some where they truly didn't know. Now we know. If I was to start playing football right now, it's all on me. Is that fair to say that, or am I wrong?
No, I think it is fair. Like I said, smoking's a good analogy. How much sympathy are you going to have somebody that continues to smoke cigarettes, or more or less starts smoking cigarettes right now when they know everything there is to know? I mean, there's some people that are simply risk takers. They'll accept the risk, and if the risk manifests itself down the road, so be it. Yeah.
All right, listen, I want to lay out for folks so they understand. We'll get to the calls, 737-7587. You specialize in medical malpractice.
Correct.
If you would, just I always like to do this at the beginning of the show. Give folks an idea of what they need to look at or consider when they think they might have a case.
Well, first of all, it begins with substandard care that does not comply with what they call the recognized standard of acceptable professional practice. That's a bunch of legal jargon for what is the doctor supposed to do or not do under the circumstances. And then, does it cause a serious, catastrophic, permanent injury? Because 90% of cases that are checked in with us get rejected because the injury is not bad enough. And the reason that's important is because juries nowadays generally don't compensate patients unless there's been a serious permanent injury.
Okay. It's funny.
Or death.
Or death. I had someone who watched the program come up to me a couple of weeks ago and asking the same thing. She had been listening to us talk about it and wondering. She goes, look, I had this bad result, and I'm really wondering about it. And I said, well, you need to research it. Call someone like Clint, because the key that you say is that it has to be whether or not they followed the normal standard of care.
Right.
Because the bottom line is, just because you have a negative result with the doctor, I mean, sometimes things don't work out.
Right.
Doctors aren't miracle workers. You're not going to get the result you want. The key is, did that doctor show negligence or not do what most of the other doctors do? Sometimes things fail when they do, right?
That's right.
But did this guy not reach that threshold?
Right. There's such a thing in medicine called a bad outcome.
Okay.
And
right.
a bad outcome does not equal negligence, and bad outcomes happen quite a bit, where a physician does everything a physician's supposed to do.
Right.
But there's no guarantee of a good result.
Okay. That's what I kind of need to separate for folks, because I think, well, I had a bad result. Do I have a case? That's not enough.
That's correct.
How many people do you get into the office that, I mean, you'll listen to them, and our viewers should know this. They can come in, and then you'll either accept it, I guess, if you think it's the right case, or tell them no.
Right.
Do a consultation.
Right. And there are many cases, I can't tell you exactly what percentage, of patients who have had a bad outcome, but there's been no negligence, no deviation from the standard of care, or what the doctor allegedly failed to do didn't cause any harm that was going to happen anyway.
Right.
And that happens quite a bit too, where people are just going to have a bad outcome.
Okay, and a lot of folks wondering too, well, how can I, if I have this problem, even afford to hire an attorney? This is one reason you have to pick and choose as you go, because all the expenses are on you. You only get paid if you win, which
That's
is,
correct.
again, contingency, correct?
That's correct.
And there's oftentimes costs involved if it goes to trial, if it gets that far. We have to pay to bring in experts to testify on your behalf, right?
That's right. But generally, you can't get a case to trial for less than $50,000.
Yeah. Now, all your cases don't always end up at trial, right? I mean, sometimes, you know, you've got them over the barrel, they're willing to settle, you decide whether, or your client decides whether or not it's worth it or not,
That's
right?
correct. And there's some situations where an offer that's been made by the physician or the hospital's insurance company isn't enough to satisfy the patient. And so the patients will not settle under those circumstances and therefore will go to trial. So, I mean, there are situations where the parties just simply cannot agree on a proper amount of money to resolve the case, and that's why a lot of times we have trials.
Now, I know the patient, your client ultimately decides, but I mean, what kind of input do you give them? Okay, I mean, you know, you've been at this a long time. You've seen a lot of cases, so you have a perspective I wouldn't if you were representing me. And they came to me and said, well, because of what we did, we'd rather avoid the bad publicity and the fact that we might lose in court. Let's offer you $250,000. In your mind, you're thinking, Nick, this is a very, very strong case. We take this to trial, you can win $1 million. How do you handle that?
The client is the boss.
Mm-hmm.
Always have to remember, the attorney gives the advice, but the client makes the decision. You're working for the client at all times. Now, the client is relying on you to give them the best judgment, the best advice possible.
Right.
And there are situations where the client may want to do something, the attorney advises another, but at the end of the day, it's the client that gets to make the decision. But it's been my experience in almost all cases, the client accepts my advice because I'm the one that's got the experience in knowing what to do and you know when to hold them, know when to fold them. I mean, that's what the lawyer's supposed to do.
Okay, so my question before we take our first call, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll get to the rest. But I mean, have you had a situation where there's been an offer where, in your mind, clearly they're lowballing you, and your client's like, "Well, that's a lot of money. I'd like to take it, but what do you think?" And you said, "Listen, they're lowballing. This is a strong case. I think we've got a good chance." Now, you can't guarantee you're going to win,
Right.
but where you've said, I think my recommendation to you is let's go to trial. Have you ever done that?
Yes. Yes. There are times when it's like poker, actually. They're bluffing you,
right.
and you wait until, the pot gets bigger before you...
By denying that claim, they may come back with another offer, right?
That's right. And there are other times where they're not bluffing at all. They're saying this is all there is, and you say to yourself after you've done your research and investigation, this case deserves a better result. This case deserves to go to trial. I think I can do better with the jury. And sometimes you win those, sometimes you lose them, but you never look back. You make your decision, you go forward, and as long as your client's with you 100%, then that's the way justice is handled.
But you have to let them, because the uncomfortable situation would be if you recommend passing on that, you go to trial, client goes along with it, and then you lose, and he's nothing. That can happen, I suppose. Probably hasn't happened much with you, but it can happen. But as long as it ultimately was their call, and I'm sure you always say, look, you're being lowballed, we go to trial, but you have to remember, there's always a chance with a jury, you never know, we're going to lose.
The longest walk any client makes, Nick, is the walk when they rejected a check that was on the table, lost at trial, and then has to walk from the courthouse to their car with nothing in their hands. Yeah. That's the longest walk anyone will
make. And ultimately, it's their call.
That's correct.
I mean, you say, listen, I think we should move forward, but you have to recognize you could take the money in hand now.
Absolutely.
And it's their call. All right, let's take a quick phone call before we get into more, before we take this first break. Let's go to Sherry. Hi, Sherry.
Oh, hello.
Good morning, Sherry. How can we help you?
Yes, I had a question. I want to know, like, if you have a case, like, if you have a medical malpractice case, but it's stemming from a workers' comp, like if you had a workers' comp doctor that you've been going to because you got hurt on the job, and because workers' comp, a lot of times they send you have you run around and stuff because they really don't want to pay for your treatment, and then you find at the end that during the whole time you asking the doctor, when he was doing surgeries and stuff on your back, but he would delay it, and you kept asking him what did the test results say? And he kept saying, oh, man, this is fine, everything's fine. He kept seeing to all kind of weird doctors. Those doctors come back to you, give you the test results, and tell you that, hey, this is not their disease. This is something dealing with what your workers' comp doctor's doing. He needs to fix the issue. And you find out at the end, because, during the whole time you deal with work comp, you feel like you have to deal with them. At the end, you find out when the workers' comp doctor says, I think you need more treatment, decides to send you home and says there's nothing wrong, and you take his test results, 2 weeks later you found another doctor that specializes exactly what that workers' comp doctor does, and that doctor looks at the test results, tells you right in the office and says, hey, you got A, B, and C that's wrong with you, and then end up having to do immediate surgery to fix the problem, the whole problem that workers' comp doctor was doing. How can you file a medical malpractice with that? Even though the whole time when you deal with the workers' comp doctor, you've been telling the case manager.
Yeah, whether or not, okay, so you familiar with a situation like that?
Yeah, I think what she's talking about is more of a workers' compensation issue than is a medical malpractice issue. Now, what she is discussing does happen from time to time where the company does not want to pay a claim that would be compensable under the work comp law. And so that doctor, the work comp doctor, says, I don't believe this is an injury within the comp law, and then you see another doctor down the road who says it is. That's not really malpractice. That is a workers' compensation issue.
Okay.
She has a right to bring a work comp action for that.
Okay, to challenge that. All right, listen, on that note, we'll take a break. When we come back, Mike and others, if you're on hold, stay right there. We'll get to you. If you want to join in the conversation, the number is 737-7587. Clint Kelly's a malpractice attorney, medical malpractice, can answer your questions that you may have about a situation you or someone you know went through involving a doctor or a hospital. And when we come back, too, we'll hear more stories about some of the cases he's handled. We'll be back right after this.